I'm Debra Valencia, and I've put together this video to demonstrate how to prepare your fabric for Katano Shibori. This is one of many projects that we'll be doing at the Japanese Shibori Textile Workshop in Fujino, Japan, with Bryan Whitehead, our host and teacher. So part of my job is just organizing the workshop, and I'm giving you demos of this homework, basically homework assignment that we can do in advance so that we have several months to complete this part of the design and also sewing preparation, cutting preparation. This way, when we get to Japan, we can spend all of our time actually working with the indigo dye and all the other materials that we'll have on hand there, and Bryan's wonderful lectures and our field trips and all of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you some finished results, and then I'll demonstrate as an overview, and then I'm going to switch to a close-up view so that you can really see what it looks like. So first of all, here is a finished piece of the katana, which I did at one of the previous workshops. So showing you how the fabric has rows or columns basically of different types of oblongs and zigzags and diamonds, semicircles, and this is all created with folding and sewing. So basically it's going to be an accordion fold, which we will then assist that folding with a long running stitch, and that's what I'll be showing you in a minute. And then after it's all sandwiched together in a really neat accordion fold, we actually do stitching into the fabric into different configurations. A line at a diagonal can create a diamond or a zigzag. A semicircle can create a circular or oblong type of design, and so on. So I'll just to give you a contrast. So also you can see how the white varies in thickness, and this just has to do with how tight the stitching is and which configuration, how small the design is, because the tighter it is or the more dense the design, the less dye can get in there. So it's going to create a bigger white area. And then just to show you a different example by a different artist, this was done by Brett Barker, who participated in the last year's workshop, and she's a wonderful fine artist and also a textile designer and teacher herself. And so here, her piece is longer. You can see her designs have more white. So I don't know the exact reason why that happens, but it has to do with perhaps how long her stitches are, how tight she pulled it. It's definitely has more white than mine. So you can see we will all get different results from our projects, even though we're all following the exact same instructions. We'll see a lot of variety, and that's part of the exciting thing of Shibori, is there's a lot of surprise to the final result. So in your homework kits, which Bryan has sent us in advance, you will find 2 pieces of fabric, 1 or 2, depending on which workshop you're attending. So it's about a meter. Long, and I'm not sure what this width is. It's about 14 inches in U.S. size, but it's probably based on a section of a meter. Oh, actually, I know. It's kimono. This is kimono width. I believe it's 30 centimeters. So Bryan has already marked the fabric. You may not be able to see this until I show you the close-up, but it actually has rows with black dots, which are drawn out in an invisible marker that will disappear after the dyeing. And so he also has generously provided sample rows of the sewing. So all it is really is a running stitch, long running stitch on the top side, and then we're going to flip it over and do a running stitch on the other side, alternating which dots that we sew. So the first step, what I like to do is actually cut a bunch of my threads, and I've prepared a few in advance, but basically what I do, I don't measure this super accurately. I just pull my thread from the spool and I cut it a few inches longer than the fabric. So just to show you a shortcut, I mean, this is will be very obvious for people who have sewing experience, but I found in our past workshops that it's kind of a mix, half and half. Some people are very advanced at sewing and have been sewing all their lives and do quilting and all that kind of stuff, and other people have never sewn in their life. And but not to worry, because the sewing is actually quite simple. So basically I just double up the length of my thread and match it up to this side, and then with scissors I'll simply cut this to get my length. So it's about 3 inches wider. In actuality that would be an extra 6 inches because it's double. So what I'm going to do now, this is just a time-saving trick I find. So once I have my length, then I'm going to just cut a bunch of these out while I'm working with thread and scissors. That way I don't have to keep going back to my spool of thread. So I'm going to go ahead and cut like that. Now if you want to measure it exactly and work with, say, a measuring tool, that's fine. That might save some thread. Always good to be efficient with your materials. Now see here, I've already prepared a bunch of threads. Now I wouldn't go overboard and prepare every single row, because if you have too many together it might get tangled and you might end up having to throw it out anyway. So I might make 10 or 12 pieces, go ahead and sew these in, and then prepare another dozen or so pieces. And that way I'm not making too many, and I'm not going to waste my materials. So now I'm going to set these aside where they won't get tangled up out of my work area. And I'm going to find my needle. And actually I need my glasses at this point. I need reading glasses, so I'm going to reach for my reading glasses. I need these for the close-up work. So I am going to now just thread my needle. Now as far as needles, I like a needle with a large, long eye, because I have to wear reading glasses at this point. To me, this is much quicker to thread, and I don't have to spend as much time threading my needle. I also like to just use old-fashioned spit to thread my needle, and although that may seem yucky at this point in time, it's kind of the way I learned to thread a needle, and I think a lot of people do it that way. So I also use a little spit for my knot. So I like to do a double knot. So as I just twisted one around, pulled it, and then I twisted it around again, and that gives me a larger knot. If you do a single knot, there's a very good chance that can pull through. We are going to be pulling these threads quite hard to get the really tight feeling, and if you have a single knot, it can actually pull through the hole. So you really need to do a double knot. Some people even do a triple knot. When we get into the Nui project, you may want to do a triple knot, but the double knot I think is fine for this one because it's a pretty tight weave cotton. So I have the double knot, and I'm going to face my fabric in this direction because, and just fold this a little so it's neat. If you look at the sample that Bryan has provided, all we're doing is a running stitch along the top where we skip every other dot, and the knot is on the top. So we're going to be doing a running stitch along the top. We're not pulling through to the other side. You're always working on the top side of the fabric. So we're going to sew all the rows on this side of the fabric, and then we're going to flip it over and do the running stitch on the other side of the fabric. And that way you don't mix up the direction that you're going. That's what I suggest. So I'm going to start with my thread, and note that on this side we are starting with the second dot, because what's happening on the other side, on the back side of the fabric, the stitching starts on the first dot, and then we're alternating which rows. This will create the accordion effect. So I've already sewn in a third row. Your fabric should have 2 rows with sewing on both sides. I've done 1 row, and now I'm going to do a second row. So all you do is catch a few threads of the fabric. So that's probably about a 32nd of an inch stitch. So I'm starting on top of the fabric, remember, at the second dot. So I'm going to pull this through, and I'll show you a close-up, as I mentioned, in a few minutes, but just to give you the overview. I've done a tiny little stitch and pulled it all the way through. The knot is there, tight. I'm going to skip a dot and go to the next dot, and I'm going to do a small stitch, skip a dot and go to the next stitch, skip a dot and go to the next stitch, and see what we've created here is a long running stitch, rather than a running stitch could be all even up, even down, but it can also alternate long, short, long, short. So that's basically all we're doing: short, long, short, long, short, long. So I will finish this row and show you how to finish it off, and then I will repeat the same step in a close-up view. So basically, it just takes a few seconds to complete 1 row. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is, I like to do this while my needle's still in here, because it kind of gives the thread some weight and something, kind of a longer piece to work with. You can cut it first, but I think this is a better way to do it, at least for me. So I'm going to just put, again, a double knot, but this time I'm not worrying about if it's tight up to the fabric. It actually doesn't matter. I'm going to just cut this and leave about a 1/2 inch tail here. We're going to, when this is all done, we're going to be pulling it from this one side. So this side is the only side that matters. And the stitches don't have to be perfect. They're going to be close enough. So here we go. So that's one finished row. Okay, so now I'm going to repeat the top side, a detail close-up now of the stitching for the Katano Shibori. So I'm threading my needle. I'm starting with the side face up, where the knots are face up, all the knots are face up on the starting side, and I'm going to start with the second dot. So I did my double knot, and I'm going to stitch on the top side, pulling through a few strands of the fabric, about a 32nd of an inch, skip a dot, and then do a short stitch. Skip a dot, do a short stitch. Skip a dot, do a short stitch. I only grabbed one thread there. That's a little bit too thin. That might break when we pull it. Oops, I just did a third stitch by accident. That's not good. I'm going to have to pull that out. And that's not easy. See, it's very easy to make mistakes. Sometimes we have to pull the thread out, and that's not fun. That's not going to work. I'm going to have to cut this knot off and do it over again. Well, that's how you fix a mistake. I'm just going to cut that knot off and pull this through. There, I saved the day. So, and even though I've done this many times, sometimes I still make mistakes, especially on the Newy project, which I will show in a different video. So again, my knot, single knot, double knot, nice fat knot. Pull this tight. Okay, so here we go again. I'm going to do my first short stitch, pull it tight, skip one dot, short stitch, skip one dot, short stitch, and here's where I was not paying attention earlier. So I'm just continue this short, long, short, long. And the last stitch, I'm going to go through the fabric just once and go downward. Now, you can see, make sure that all your short and long stitches line up. This is important because it's necessary to create the accordion fold. If one of these, if I were to skip two dots like I did in the mistake, it's not going to line up. It's not going to fold correctly. So just check yourself each time you do it. So I'm going to put a knot at the end of my stitch. It doesn't have to be tight up to the fabric. It can just kind of be anywhere there. I have it about 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch away, and I'm just going to cut that tail. This part can vary. You can see these are slightly different lengths because we're going to pull these when this is all done from this side, so it's not going to matter. These are all going to get taken off anyway. So I'm going to continue this process. Again, I've got my thread all prepared, so I'm just going to pull myself a piece of thread, clean up my needle, put the scraps over to the side, thread my needle. If you prefer to use a needle threader, you can. I suggest that you bring your own to the workshop, although Bryan does have a lot of sewing supplies around. Those are a little hard to come by, and sometimes they have little wires, so they get kind of bent out of shape. So that's something I really think, they're very inexpensive. You can get them at any sewing store, so you might want to bring your own and just keep it in your personal supply cubby. So again, I'm going to just start with the second dot and skip every other dot. And if you're working on a hard surface like I am, you can just do this pretty quickly because you don't have to worry about it catching onto other fabric. You know, if you're sitting in a chair or, an armchair or propped up in bed with your pillows or whatever, it's pretty easy to kind of get this caught onto your clothing or whatever you're leaning on. So this is one project I do suggest doing on a hard surface. It's just much quicker and it doesn't really take that much time. So there you go. There's another row. So again, I'm going to knot it off. Okay, so here I have completed the long running stitch on one entire side of my fabric. So I'm going to just double check. I'm just going to examine the whole thing and make sure I have all my stitches lining up at the same dot. And everything's good to go. This one I pulled a little tightly, but again, it's okay because we're going to be pulling this anyway. So that one's a little short. So just double checking, everything's checking out good. This is what it looks like. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over and note that the knots are all facing on the same side, but I always want to start on my right, going right to left. I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you may want to do it the opposite way, but I'm going to simply flip it over this way because I still want to sew. I want to sew right to left. Being right-handed, that's just the natural way to go. So what I'm going to do, so following Bryan's examples, we are now going to start on the first dot, but with the knot on the back side of the fabric. But again, we're still going to sew on the front of the fabric. What was the back is now the front. It's now the top side. So same size thread. Now I'm running out of thread. I only have one piece left, and you could see that my when I was doing the sewing, my pile of fabric, my pre-cut strands were starting to get tangled. So that, again, that's why you don't want to do enough for the entire project necessarily at first, all up front, because if it gets tangled you might end up throwing out the whole batch. So I'll just do little batches at a time. It just worked out that this was very close to the number I needed for one side. So I'm going to go ahead, while I still have one to work with, I'm going to go ahead and do my extra threads. Get my thread again. I'll just do a couple for the sake of the demonstration. Well, actually I might as well do the whole thing because I'm going to be sewing the entire thing. So let's see. I'm going to go like this. I might as well get this out of the way for the moment. Take that out of my workspace. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out a whole bunch of threads. And again, if you prefer to actually figure out a dimension and you have a yardstick, that's a really easy way to do it because then you can just stretch it along the yardstick. I just don't happen to have a yardstick available. I have an art ruler that's only 18 inches and that's not going to be helpful. So just by eye is fine. So I'm doing it like this. Just reaching it out as far as I can reach. And I'm just cutting it. I actually did not count how many rows. That may vary depending on the length of the fabric that were sent. So I noticed one of the finished samples I showed you was much longer than the other sample. So you would actually have to count how many are on the particular piece that you received. Again, just eyeballing that. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Now I have about 7 or 8 pieces ready to go. I'm going to get my fabric again, and we are starting with the knots on the right side, if you're right-handed, but facing down, and I'm going to thread my needle. And you see, even though I have been sewing all my life, I still fumble around with the threading and the knotting and all of that and matching up the ends. That takes up more time than the actual sewing. So I'm going to start at the bottom and pull upwards, pull that tight. I'm going to skip the dot that's already sewn, the second one, and I'm going to go to the third one. Now here you need to make sure that you don't catch the thread, the long stitch on the back. So this side you do have to be more careful, because you could accidentally catch that, and then it's going to make it impossible to get the clean accordion fold. So actually what I'm doing with my finger right now is I'm moving that thread out of the way, because it's running directly under it. I can see through here, but again, that's not even foolproof. I'm actually taking my finger and pushing this down right at the moment I'm doing the stitch. That way I actually don't have to look at it, because that's going to take way too much time. So using my finger, I'm pushing it out of the way. I can feel it, and that's going to speed up the process of doing the second row. So on this side now, we're ending at the dot before the end. I'm just pulling that, making sure I have enough. And you can see on Bryan's sample, one of them, the tail is long and the knot is not near the fabric, and the other one just happens to be tight up to the fabric. It doesn't matter if these are perfect, as long as you have a little extra, because again, we're going to pull all of these from this side. So in the end, it won't matter if those are not perfect. The main thing is to get the knot on this side close to the beginning. So you can see there's variation here, so don't be overly concerned with that part. So I'm ending at the second dot, started at the bottom, facing up, so the knot is here. Long stitch, short, long stitch, short, long, short, long, short, and I'm ending at the dot before the end. I'm putting in a double knot somewhere close to the end, about a ½ inch. And I'm just cutting off a little tail. So I've now completed the sewing for my Katana Shibori. So I'm just going to double check the entire piece and make sure that I didn't catch threads, especially on that flipping over to the back side. It's very easy. You could see, even though I fast motioned through the entire sewing process, you could see I was always handling the fabric with my other hand, not only scrunching it up so I could get close to the dot, but I was also pushing the thread back with my index finger. That way, every time I took a stitch, I could avoid catching it onto that piece, because that'll cause a problem when we're pulling it. So basically, this is the first phase of the preparation. We will. At the end of this video, I will show some still shots as a slideshow, just showing some of the variations, close-up details of what this particular technique will yield for us. And in a separate section, we will work with Bryan in Japan in person and actually create the designs, the additional stitches that will create our unique designs. So I look forward to seeing you in Japan for the remainder of the workshop. And this is one of a series of many demos that I will be doing for the different techniques. Thank you so much. So this concludes the first phase of the Katana Shibori preparation. This is simply the running stitch, which will create the accordion fold. There'll be a second phase where we actually create the stitches that make the designs that I showed you at the beginning. And after this live portion of the video, I'm going to show a short slideshow at the tail end, which will show you a lot of other variations of the katana so that you can get an idea of what you can create with this technique. Thank you.